Hey, welcome. Thank you for joining us for Culinary celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, which, as you may know, runs from September 15th to October 15th. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. We'd also like to thank the libraries in Ashland, Groton, Lincoln, Newton, Somerville, and Tewksbury for partnering with us on this event. After the program, I will send out the recipes. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel, so you can enjoy the program tonight and watch it all over again and cook along later. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A or chat, and Trisha will answer them as best she can. Now I'd like to introduce our guest this evening. Trisha Pérez Kennealy is the owner of the Inn at Hastings Park, a Lexington landmark. She earned her Diplôme de Cuisine and Diplôme de Pâtisserie at Le Cordon Bleu Culinary School in London. Trisha ran a series called Back to Basics for us, and those episodes are available for you to view on our YouTube channel. Welcome, Trisha. We are so excited to join you in your kitchen.
Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome, everybody. My name is Trisha Pérez Kennealy. Helen, thank you so much for having me. Deja vu, back in my kitchen, cooking via Zoom. And I'm totally thrilled to have people from all of the different libraries throughout the area. I know that my family and I, when we first moved to Lexington in 1982, one of the big attractions for us, I'm from Puerto Rico. I lived there until I was 12, at which point I moved to Lexington. And I come from a long line of very, very avid readers. So when we would want to read, we had a great library at our school in Puerto Rico, but we would often have to go to the bookstore. And that was like a big Sunday event in our house. It was called Bell Book and Candle. And it was in the Condado Santurce area of Puerto Rico. And the biggest part of our move from Puerto Rico to Lexington was actually all of our books. And we actually had given away probably half of what we had. So the Cary Library was really such a great draw for our family when we moved to the community. So I'm delighted to be able to be here. As Helen mentioned, I am the owner of the Inn at Hastings Park, and the inn also has a very strong connection to the library. The inn is named for the woman who was the original benefactor of the library. And I thought that it was only fitting that a business, I was beginning a business as a woman, for me to pay tribute to another woman who had played a very prominent role in establishing our public library here in Lexington. As many people know, as I said, I am Puerto Rican. I'm incredibly proud of my Puerto Rican heritage. And one of the best ways that I love to share my culture and my heritage is to share Puerto Rican cooking with people. So tonight, what we're working on two recipes. One is called mofongo, which most people who have been to the island hopefully have had the experience of tasting. It is traditionally made with a plantain. This obviously looks a lot like a banana, but it is not a banana. And we use the plantains in two forms. The recipe that we're using tonight, we use the green plantain. When it turns yellow, it does take on a sweetness to it. And we also, we pan fry those, and, we serve them as a side dish. They're called maduros. The word maduro means ripe. So that's another variation. The plantains, you can buy them at Market Basket. I have very vivid memories of moving to Boston in 1982, and it was very difficult to find a lot of the products that I'm going to be cooking with today. But many of the local supermarket chains, especially Market Basket, have done an incredible job at providing a lot of the vegetables, the fruits and vegetables that we need to make a lot of the recipes from the Caribbean. So it used to be that we would have to go up to Lawrence, or we would have to go into Villa Victoria, which is the Puerto Rican neighborhood in Boston, to get these ingredients. But now these are readily available at Market Baskets throughout the region. Some of the Stop and Shops carry it as well. So it's really nice to see the awareness of the cooking from the Caribbean. It is really important for people to understand Puerto Rican cooking is very different than Mexican cooking. And a lot of people, I think that that was something, especially as we celebrate this culture, there are so many different cultures that comprise what people consider to be Hispanic or Latin. But it's really important to understand that each of the countries has sort of their distinctive cooking. There's some similarities. In Puerto Rico, our cuisine draws on the influence, we were a shipping port. So that meant that there were people, we were under Spanish rule until 1898, but there were also people from France. We had people that were brought to the island as slaves from different parts of Africa, and some of their culinary traditions have a very, very strong influence in what we do on the island. Our food is not spicy, it is well seasoned. What I talk about is we use a lot of garlic. We have a pepper that's indigenous to Puerto Rico that we grow in Puerto Rico. It looks more like a Cubanelle pepper as opposed to the bell peppers that we see here. We use culantro and cilantro. Culantro is a wider leaf than the cilantro. And we make a variety of seasonings and spices to flavor our food. In the recipes that I've included, I included a homemade recipe for adobo. Goya probably is the largest seller of adobo. It's a blend of salt and garlic. It has a little bit of turmeric in it. There's some different versions of it. This one, the one with the orange cap, has like some orange flavoring to it. The one with the blue cap has black pepper in it. I also occasionally like to make the seasoning myself. So I also included a recipe for that. So the first recipe, as I said, and Helen, I see, is there a question? Okay,
No,
I'm
question.
looking, I have a computer going as well. So I just want to emphasize too, if at any point you have any questions, feel free to submit those to the chat and Helen will share those with the group. And I truly mean it. Please feel free, interrupt, ask questions. I'm happy to answer those as we go along. So as I said, I have my plantain. What I did today is I'm working on a dish called mofongo. Mofongo, we have mofongo. We also make something called trifongo. Mo is one, tri is three. Mofongo is traditionally made with a plantain, but it also can be made with cassava or yuca. That's what we call it in Puerto Rico. If you're doing a trifongo, that also might have a yautía, which is the type of sweet potato that grows in Puerto Rico. Tonight, I'm doing the one with the plantain. And what I did before I got my plantains ready, I pureed garlic. I mashed it really, really finely. And I had it in a bowl and I heated up about 4 ounces of olive oil. I brought it, close to that really its frying point. And then I took the garlic, took the olive oil off the heat, and I poured the olive oil in. Can people see? Is that enough can you sort of see it?
Yeah.
And what I
Tilt it a
did is
little bit.
I'm gonna do it like that in case it spills. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did is I basically infused that olive oil with the garlic. I then took my plantain. The reason I have the gloves on is that sometimes the plantain, it's much thicker. I'm going to show you the skin of the plantain. The peel is a little bit thicker. It has a little bit of a different texture than a banana peel, and it's a little bit more fibrous. So I'm kind of just using my knife to get under it, but it comes right off. And I'm going to show you that thickness. The texture of the plantain when it's not ripe, when it's green. So can you see the thickness there? And as you can see, I think of a banana when it's ripe as that peel being a little softer. This is a little firmer. You can sort of see that to the touch. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the plantain, I'm sort of cutting down. It's kind of like a seam. And I sort of break through I stick my thumb under it. These I would describe as sort of medium-sized plantains. Occasionally they're longer than this, but what I'm going to do is I'm making sure there's none of that fibrous part left on it, and I'm cutting it into fours. I fried everything beforehand because I didn't want the sound of the frying oil to disrupt what I was doing. But what I want people to see is this is the size pot that I'm using. So this is sort of, if you have a standard collection of pots, this is, you know, it's not quite a stock pot, but it's like a soup pot. And I'm going to show you the container. This is what I use, right? Because usually I would be cooking, I did both my meat pies and I did my plantains in here. There's a reason we call it deep frying, okay? And that is because we really want to have the depth of the oil. There's no such thing as, oh, I'm going to make low-fat mofongo. Everything in moderation, right? So the problem is if you don't use enough oil and you put the plantains in like a small amount of oil, the only thing that's going to happen is the plantain, and this applies to anything that you're deep frying, it's going to basically leach in the oil, and then it's actually going to be more fattening. So if you're going to do something that is deep frying, I know that for one of the demonstrations for the holidays, I also happen to be Jewish. So I demonstrated making sufganiyot, which are jelly donuts. And I really emphasize to people, there's about 3 inches of oil and then 3 inches of space. Okay. If you want to use a deeper pot, even better. But the whole point that I'm trying to make, use the requisite amount of oil that we talk about in the recipe, or else you're going to end up with a greasy product. This is the size of my plantains. So I put them in the hot oil. It says medium high oil. It's about 350, 360 degrees. I would recommend going a little higher than that 350 degrees on that fry, because when you add all of the plantains to the pot to fry them, the temperature in the pan, in the oil is going to drop. And that happens with almost anything that you do. So you really want to be mindful. I highly recommend that if you are going to do deep frying, this is a great kitchen tool to have. This is a pen. So it's very easy for me to get that temperature. So right now, this oil's hot because it's been on for a while. Like this oil is almost at 400 degrees right now. So I had been cooking and doing other things. And I left it on the heat. That would be a little bit too hot. So you really do want to make sure it's a great idea to invest in that type of thermometer. If you do not, the other way to check it is to use your wooden spoon. So if you have like a wooden cooking spoon and you put it into the oil, you'll see like bubbling happening around. If that happens, you're ready to go. Of course, the other thing you can do is you could put one piece of whatever it is you're frying to see how it reacts. I put my plantains in that oil. I cooked the pieces of plantain for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then what I did, this is a mortar and a pestle. We call it a pilon in Puerto Rico. And what I did is I put a tablespoon of my garlic oil with a bunch of the pieces of garlic. I put it into the pilon and I mashed up the plantains. It's sort of the consistency of like an al dente potato is how I would describe it. On my sheet, right here, what I have here, and I'm going to take these off so that you can see now.
Quick question, Trisha. What is your
Sure.
preferred brand of thermometer?
This one, I'm trying to think. This was actually this particular company is ThermoWorks, and we use them at the inn. I find it to be incredibly consistent. And I kind of walk around with it, and I have the same ones at the end. So those are kind of the ones that I like to use. So sometimes when we make mofongo, we put what's called chicharrón. So chicharrón is our version of crackling. So what I did was I marinated, I actually used in the recipe that I sent you, I do it with chicken thighs, I do it with pork. Today I did it with pork. So I know that a lot of times there are a lot of people who are vegetarian. So if we were in a restaurant in Puerto Rico, chances are there's going to be crackling inside mixed in with the mofongo. But sometimes what I like to do is I make my mofongo a vegetarian way. I don't put any of the crackling in there, but then I serve these pieces of crackling around it. So what I did was I mashed it up, like it's sort of the consistency, as I said, as an al dente or firmer potato. And I then, it was this, in this pilon, I was able to get the equivalent of 2 plantains. So this is going to be a pretty big serving of mofongo. And what I did is once I had mixed it, and I put about 2 for each plantain. So each plantain is breaking down into 4 pieces. I put a tablespoon of the olive oil and garlic mixture. And then I use this. You could use a ramekin if you have ramekins that you make any sort of puddings or dessert with. You can use that to sort of put it in. And what I did was I molded it, and then I'm going to serve it with these little pieces of chicharrón. I have to try a piece of my chicharrón. Yummy. So I marinated the pork. You can marinate the chicken overnight. I used a combination of oregano, vinegar, some garlic powder, a little bit of my homemade adobo. So it has like a very, as I said, like well seasoned. It's not spicy. It has like a salty fattiness to it that works really well with the taste of the plantain. So a plantain, to me, it sort of tastes. Sometimes bananas aren't sweet. They'd have it's kind of a cross between like a not so ripe regular banana and a potato. But I think it works really well with the garlic and the oil. So the crunchy texture, like the crunchy soft texture of the mofongo, along with the well-seasonedness of the meat, is a really nice combination. As you may or may not know, Puerto Rico is an island. It's teeny. It's like 25 miles by like 130. So it's small. But because we are blessed with having these beautiful ocean waters, we have a lot of seafood. So another typical preparation of mofongo is to do it with seafood. So then what they would do is they would take this mofongo and they would make a well in the middle, and they could stuff it with shrimp. They could stuff it with Caribbean lobster. They could stuff it with red snapper. And then there's several options for sauces. One of them is a more garlic-based sauce. And then there's also a salsa criollo, which is more tomatoes and peppers. So we use mofongo in a lot of different ways. So I hope that if you haven't been to Puerto Rico, some of what you're seeing today will inspire you to hop on a flight. There's like 10 direct flights at this point. Actually, I think that's right. It changed during the pandemic, but all of the major airlines, most of them have a direct flight to Puerto Rico. It's 3.5 hours to get there, and you can be guaranteed a beautiful vacation in paradise and some really delicious food. So I'm hoping that you'll go and you'll try mofongo everywhere you go. So that is our mofongo with some chicharrón. All right. Now, the next recipe that I'm going to talk about is a family favorite, and it's our meat pies. So my father's family is from the southern side of the island. The capital of Puerto Rico is San Juan. And actually, a lot of people don't realize that the original name of the island was San Juan, St. John, named, for St. John the Baptist. And the island, the capital was called Puerto Rico, which means rich port. And that was inverted. A cartographer inverted it, and somehow the island became known as Puerto Rico, and the capital is San Juan. The southern side of the island, the major city on the southern side of the island, is called Ponce, for Juan Ponce de Leon, who was, of course, looking for that fountain of youth. And my family is from a town that is about 10 miles to the west of Ponce. So my family is from the southwestern corner of the island. And I have made it a tradition for my children and my family. We go to Puerto Rico at least once a year, and I make a point of taking them to the side of the island where my family is from. Both of my grandparents, my grandfather actually was an engineer. He spent some time working he worked at NASA, he worked at some different places like that. My grandmother was she was a nutritionist. She worked in public school. She worked in New York when they lived in the Bronx. And she also worked in the school in Guayanilla, which is the name of the town that we're from. My grandparents lived in the States from the 1940s until the late 60s, and they returned to Puerto Rico. And then my family went to Puerto Rico when I was only 2. We moved back when I was in 1972. But some of my fondest memories of being a child were being at my grandmother's house. So my grandparents lived in what truly was an urbanization. So that was the United States. Set aside money to build different neighborhoods in Puerto Rico, and they were cookie cutter. Every house looked the same. It was the same footprint, same size backyard. The backyard was probably 20 by 20. It might have been a little bit larger, but in that backyard, my grandmother and grandfather had guava trees. They had avocados. My grandmother grew coffee. She had grapes. She had what we call limones, which most people think is a lemon, but it's actually a lime. And then my great-grandfather, who lived to be in his 90s, lived up in the mountains above the town of Guayanilla. And I have very vivid memories. I'm only 5'2", but he was almost 6 feet tall. And Papa Juan, my great-grandfather, used to climb into the grapefruit tree and pick grapefruits for us, for the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren to enjoy. So the food that I grew up eating, like with my grandparents, and they had passion fruit. So my grandmother would always be squeezing, we would have fresh squeezed passion fruit juice. And the word that we use is, throughout Latin America, a lot of people call them maracuya, but we call them parcha. I don't know why there was a different word, but I would be sitting at my grandmother's table and I would have fresh squeezed passion fruit juice, which is quite delicious. But my father is the oldest of 4 children. He is the oldest of his generation. He must have I think he has about 40 first cousins. Some of his first cousins are actually younger than I am. So whenever we would be at my grandparents' house, there would be like a cast of thousands, and my grandparents would cook. And one of the things that they cooked meat pies. So empanadillas. And my grandfather loved to fish, so he would often make one, empanadillas de chapin, which were like a fish that he caught when he would go fishing, off the coast in Guayanilla. But the recipe that my father and my family, and now my children and my nieces we call them Papa's meat pies. So Goya, Goya's, their slogan is, si es Goya, tiene que ser bueno. And that slogan is, if it's Goya, then it has to be good. And they really have had a corner on the market, on a lot of the staples that we use. My grandmother used to make her dough by hand. I take a shortcut now. In the frozen food section, there's other brands, but Goya has these dough discs. And this is what they look like. And the reason they have that orange color is that they have annatto, which is an orange seed, and it adds that orange coloring. So what I do is I take a combination, and I have a bag here to show you. So this was from the butcher. So this is a meatloaf mix. So this is a combination of beef, pork, veal. You could do it with chicken. It tastes, the chicken's a little bit leaner, so you'll need to add a little bit more fat. You could do it with all beef if you prefer, but this is sort of what, my father has done to sort of make the recipe his own. So we start with a diced, very finely chopped onion. And this is what I mean in terms of the texture. So, these are very small pieces. Hopefully you can see. And then I also chopped up garlic. and I sauteed that in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then I added the ground beef to it. And this recipe, this is sort of what it looks like cooked. I cooked the ground beef until it was just barely cooked. And then I added sazon. So I talked a little bit about adobo. Another very popular seasoning in Puerto Rican cooking is sazon. So I make my own sazon now. I do have this in the house. So MSG, monosodium glutamate. It's used in a lot of Asian cooking. It's used throughout. It was something that was meant to be used in extreme moderation. But unfortunately, there were recipes that were developed by food scientists that went completely overboard in terms of the amount of MSG that they were using. And there's some people who really they get really terrible headaches from eating MSG. The store-bought product has MSG in it. And in our family, we're sort of, we didn't know for a while, but that is one thing that was sort of contributing to people getting really uncomfortable headaches. So what I've done is I've included a homemade recipe for sazon. Sazon, sazonar is the verb to season. So sazon is the word for season. Sazon has kind of become like the word Kleenex, right? That Kleenex is synonymous with tissue. Sazon, like this particular, they took that verb and made it the name of that product. But what I've done is I make my own version. I included it in the recipe, and I seasoned the meat with 2 tablespoons of sazon. Then I added some tomato sauce. I added some capers and a little bit of salt. And then I let that cook for once I had added the tomato sauce, I let it simmer for a little bit so the sauce sort of cooked through a little bit. And then what I do, one of the things that you learn in culinary school, and actually one of the things that I learned from my grandparents, when my grandparents would make these, when everyone was at the house, we would be making 300 and 400 at a time. And, my grandmother had a very, state-of-the-art modern kitchen inside that she never used. She basically had what we would call a fogon. She had a propane stove that was it was sort of like a little room like a tin room that she added to the back of her house. And that is where her and my grandfather were happiest cooking, because they could be outside in their backyard. They could enjoy the beautiful weather in Puerto Rico. And I just sort of laughed. They had this beautiful kitchen that they barely used. So from a very young age, my cousins and I were sort of drafted into helping fill these. So you take the disc, and these come frozen. And what I did was I let them defrost overnight, because you have to be a little bit careful about letting them defrost outside on the counter, because sometimes they'll get too soft. And I'm going to show you what that means, like the impact of that when you barbecue. So as you can see, what I did, this is a Silpat mat. It's a silicone mat, and you can use parchment paper. And I basically lay out the Silpat mat and I lay out the discs. Each of these packages comes with 10. A pound of meat, you usually can fill about 20 of these if you use a generous tablespoon of the meat. What I like to do is I like to make things very systematic. I like to make sure that I'm doing the same thing. It's repetitive, so that I can be really efficient and I have consistency. So I am a big fan of the ice cream scoop, and this particular ice cream scoops have numbers, and those numbers are associated with a measurement, whether it be a tablespoon, a quarter cup, a half a cup. So we use these all the time at the end. We use them to do things like this. We use them to scoop out cookies. We use them to scoop out muffin batter. Sometimes I use them at home if I'm making pancakes. So it's just in ensuring that there's consistency. The other thing that I like about using the ice cream scoop as opposed to a measuring spoon is that depending on the leanness or the combination of ground meat that you use, it will release fat. And so I'm trying to, let me show you what I'm doing because that's a little bit out of the shot. I'm taking the scooper and I'm then sort of pushing it up against the side, and that's draining out sort of any of the fat that I might have. Are there any questions?
Yeah, sure. Actually, while you're talking about the ice cream scoop number, which number are you using at the moment?
A 40. I'm using a 40. I'm at that stage in my life that I need glasses. So this is a 0.71 ounce, 21 milliliters. So this is a 40. And you can get these King Arthur's, like their website has some really good ones. You can get them on Amazon. And I would recommend, like, if you bake, they're great for making meatballs. If you do things that you're portioning a lot of different things, they're a great tool to have.
Great, thank you. Someone asked what brand of cooking oil. I think they were referring to the high temperature frying oil.
Oh, the big vat of Wesson oil that I used. Today I used vegetable oil. Another story related to my maternal grandmother, my Jewish grandmother. I think I'm sort of partial to Wesson because it was what my maternal grandmother used. And my maternal grandmother didn't particularly love to cook, but there were a few things that she made that were absolutely amazing. And so, she grew up with a kosher home, and she used to make, what she called shell steak. And she would make hand cut French fries, which were unbelievable, fried in Wesson oil. And she would also make a salad. And her salad was literally iceberg lettuce, tomato, white onion, and a cucumber, like all chopped up. And she would dress the salad. And, in those days when we would come to visit her from Puerto Rico, she so wanted to cook for us. So she was like, I've got it. Just sit, relax. So I wasn't always tuned in to exactly what she was doing. And it was one of those questions that I sort of I never asked, like, okay, so how did you do the dressing? And it wasn't until I was in culinary school, the Cordon Bleu, and we were talking about all the different salts. Oh, here we go. And here you were. So literally, I figured out. I was like, what did she do? And then all of a sudden, it hit me. She used to drizzle the salad with Wesson oil, kosher salt, and pepper. And to me, it was like the best salad ever. So it's just so funny, the things that, I've had the pleasure of eating some of the most beautiful vegetables in the world, beautiful salads, which I absolutely enjoy. But there's something about that. So I'm a little biased towards the Wesson oil, and now you understand why. And my kosher salt, my diamond crystals, because that's what grandma used. So getting back to the meat pie. So what I've done is I put the scoop of the filling on the lower half of the circle. So, if you think of the circle, so right below the diameter point, right, that widest point of the circle. This is filled with water. And I'm coming around the perimeter of the circle, and I'm using that water. It's going to help me seal. So I'm making sure that the meat, sort of like a thumb, the width of my thumb, the thickness of my thumb is sort of that distance. And then I'm using a fork and I'm pressing down firmly to make sure that I have sealed. So some people use a fork to crimp their pie crusts. So it's sort of the same. And I'm going to hold this up so that you can see it. So basically, I've crimped the bottom of the pie, and you really do want to make sure that it is sealed. The other thing that I didn't mention, it's in the recipe. There's capers in here, and there's also Spanish olives. Okay, so here we go. I dipped water around the perimeter. Can you see? So I'm using, and you can use a pastry brush to do it, but it's just as easy for me to use my fingers. I'm kind of pushing the meat just a little bit in with my thumb. And then I'm using my finger, like my thumb as a guide. Can you see that? That like the thickness of my thumb is a good guide for the border that you should have. And then I'm taking my fork and I am pressing extremely firmly down. You do want to make sure that you are not puncturing the dough, like this part of the dough, because if you do, it'll open up when you fry and it will pop, the meat will begin to pop out. Does that make sense? So as I said, like I lay, I lay out on my counter. I have my clean working surface. I do it on a silpat mat. You could do it on a wooden block. You could do it on a cutting board. You can use parchment paper. And what I do is I line them up. So these have been a very popular, my kids' friends now request that we make them. One of my middle son just went off to college, and one of his friends, their family did the nicest thing. They had a potluck dinner for the boys right before they were leaving. And the idea was that we should each bring, like the boys were told each of our families, like what it was that they wanted, what was their favorite thing from home that they wanted us to bring. And so I think I made like 50 meat pies for that gathering. But depending on which child, one of my children insists that they don't like olives. So if they're the one requesting it, there's no olives in it. So I try to make it what is it, McDonald's special orders don't upset us. So I try to make sure that everyone sort of has their preference. Once these are in this shape, the other thing that you can do is sometimes, like if we're together with my father and my kids and my nieces are together, we'll make a bunch of them. And I want to show you something about the packaging. So when they come in the package, each disc is separated by a piece, these pieces of plastic paper. So if I was going to freeze these, what I would do is I would use the paper that came to stack them.
How long would you be able to keep them for in the freezer?
I think, I would probably do like 3 to 4 months. And obviously you want to make sure that they're not getting freezer burn. So you want to make sure that you're using a high quality storage container, whether, I actually wanted to show this to people. So these are stashers. So I try to do like meal prep and portion out, like if I buy a large quantity of meat, but I'm not a big fan of using all the Ziploc bags. So these come in all sorts of sizes and you can do all sorts of things with them. So I would feel very comfortable like storing them in here. This particular, what's in here right now is the pork that I marinated to make the mofongo. So in this was I basically cut up the pieces of pork and was able to marinate it with the vinegar. So we also do, when I was growing up in Puerto Rico, food is very important in our culture. And when we were growing up, we would have like a 20-minute snack time in the morning, and then we would have a full lunch at school. And when I mean full lunch, I mean like roasted chicken, rice and beans, a vegetable. And that's the way it was. But the snacks, we would have variations of these. We would have meat pies, but we also had something called pastelillos, and they would be filled with cheese. So there were like pizza ones, there were cheese ones. And I sometimes make sort of a tribute to the Spanish influence in Puerto Rico. I make one with manchego and guava paste. So guava paste is something like when we were little, we would have like saltine crackers with guava. It's similar to membrillo. If you've ever had a cheese plate, like a Spanish cheese plate, they make membrillo with quince as well. So what I do, and I can also, I think I can include that recipe as well. Like I'll send that to you, Helen, so you can have that. So if people were looking to do something that was a little bit different, or they wanted to do something that wasn't meat based, they could certainly do that.
Great, thank you. We do have some questions.
Please.
Can you recommend a Puerto Rican restaurant in the greater Boston area?
So I would highly recommend, and I'm going to double check the name of the second one. So Vejigantes. So there's a beautiful Puerto Rican tradition in Boston, in the neighborhood. I think it's often referred to as Parcel 19. There was a group of Puerto Rican citizens who still live, in the Via Victoria area, which is kind of between the Back Bay and the South End. I mean, it's right there, right in the middle. And there's two really good restaurants. One is Vejigantes, and the other one is a smaller sort of cafeteria style, that you just walk on up, but the food is really, really good. So what I will do is I will get that recommendation, and I will make sure that Helen shares that with you. I also have put together, if people are interested, I'm actually really proud. I've been selected to be an ambassador for an effort called Junte Boricua. And what it is it's an effort like being run by Puerto Ricans who live on the mainland to encourage people who are of Puerto Rican descent and otherwise to come back to the island and come and learn about our culture and our tradition. So I actually have some suggestions for people, whether you want to go to San Juan or you want to go off the beaten track. For such a small island, we really have a lot of different opportunities for people to learn about our culture. It's really, it's an incredibly diverse, I don't know what people think when they say this to me, but I often get, well, you don't look Puerto Rican. And my comment is, well, that actually means that you've never been to Puerto Rico, because on the island of Puerto Rico, because there are so many, like my personal ancestry, I have French, Venezuelan roots, there's African roots, there's people, like my family is comprised of people who arrived on the island as early as the 1700s, and we represent the diversity of the island. And so if you're interested in learning more about going to visit, I'm more than happy. Give me a call, come to the inn, I'll sit down with you and I'll help you plan a fabulous trip. That's how strongly I feel about encouraging people to go to Puerto Rico and see everything that we have to offer.
Thanks, that sounds wonderful. Someone's asking whether, are there any Puerto Rican cookbooks you'd recommend someone who doesn't have the experience
yes.
with this style of ethnic cooking?
So I'm going to recommend two, at least, well, yes. So give me 1 second because I want to grab one. So this is my Spanish version. This was actually a present to me from my aunt. So Cocina Criolla. So Carmen Aboy Valdejuli, and I will include that spelling. This has been translated into English. It's called Puerto Rican Cookery. But what's very interesting is that I have multiple editions and multiple versions. The translation does not have all of the same recipes that the Puerto Rican does, but it is a fabulous, well-researched book. The other two cookbooks that I would recommend, Daisy Cooks. She used to have a show on PBS, and there's a big contingent in her family that is Puerto Rican. And then the other person whose cookbook I would recommend, there is a fabulous chef in Puerto Rico. We've actually been trying to get Wilo to come to cook at the inn. His name is Wilo Bennett, and he trained at La Bernardin in New York, but has been back on the island for years. And basically what he's done I think why I have such an affinity for his cooking is that he was also classically trained. And the essence of French culinary training is to teach you technique so that you can use the best available ingredients that you have locally to make incredible food. So what he's done is he's used that technique and has reinterpreted some of, the best Puerto Rican classics. And so he used to have a fine dining restaurant in the Condado area, which is the tourist area. And he was already making plans to open the newer restaurant that's called Huilo. And very sadly, during Maria, his fine dining restaurant was destroyed. And so he already had the plans in place to open his new restaurant, which is in what's called the San Patricio area. It would kind of be like having a restaurant like in Arlington or Lexington. It's like a 15-minute Uber ride if you're staying in the center, like if you're staying in the Condado, like in the San Juan area. But we go every year that we go, and it's phenomenal. He's written at least two cookbooks. They're excellent, really great history. And then I guess the next one you could be looking for is, I'm hoping by next summer that my cookbook will be ready, and there'll be many Puerto Rican favorites in that as well. So, and I truly mean this. My passion is culinary education. So if you are trying any of my recipes and you have a question, I truly mean it. People are more than welcome to get in touch with me and ask me directly. You can ask me via Instagram, Trisha Pérez Kennealy. I'm on Instagram. You can direct message me there. I have videos on TikTok that have all sorts of information, all sorts of cooking tidbits and whatnot. And of course, feel free. You can email me at the inn at cpkennealy@Hastings Park, and I would be more than happy to answer any and all of those questions.
Thank you, Trisha. So I guess the last bit is how long and at what temperature do you fry the empanadas?
I apologize. So the first batch usually takes about 5 minutes, but you really want to be looking closely. And thank you for reminding me, because I didn't show you the finished product. I am, even though she has passed, a huge fan of Julia Child. And what I loved about both her cookbooks and her television show is that she wasn't afraid of showing you a mistake, right? Or showing like what didn't work. And the thing about cooking is that oftentimes things look wrong, like right before you get to the finish line, they sometimes look incorrect. So I don't know if you remember, but I talked about you have to be careful about how you defrost the discs, because sometimes if there's too much moisture, they're going to get soggy. So this is a well executed empanada, right? Nicely, the crimping. I'm going to open it up. The meat's in the middle. So the dough is all cooked. This one, and I knew it as soon as I did it, because this was the disc that was on the bottom and there was moisture. And I actually, I could tell, even when I took it out of the freezer, I think that something had happened in the shipping. So what happened was this didn't stick together. So this didn't seal. As you can tell, the meat that was inside, that's completely overcooked. So this is what you want to be careful of. If it's too moist and it's not sticking, seal it. I would put the ones, if you think it's too moist and soft, put it in the refrigerator for about 5 minutes, and that will help it stick together. This is still good, but it's not perfect. But as you can see, these are what my Papa's empanadillas look like.
Can you fry it in the air fryer?
It's not as good. This is a big debate. This is kind of a big debate in our family. You certainly can do it. What I would do if you're going to do that is they might be a little bit softer. The dough might not be as crispy. But, if you would prefer to do it, I would recommend, if you want a healthier alternative, go ahead, do it in the air fryer. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see this in the shot, I love my air fryer. I use it all the time. So I would probably experiment with it. Maybe you want to brush what you may want to do is use some of the fat that gets released from the meat. You may just want to brush it. And I'll try this. Maybe you know what? I will try this with, after we're done, I will air fry one and use some of the fat that released from the meat to sort of, to coat the pastry, because that might help give us some crispiness. So I will do an experiment and I will share that with Helen so she can give you all that answer.
Fabulous. Does anyone have any other questions for Trisha?
So Helen, can I make a quick shameless plug for some things that are going on at the inn?
Of course.
So for those of you who are not from the Lexington area, I hope that you've heard about the Inn at Hastings Park. We are a Relais and Chateau property, the only Relais and Chateau hotel in the Boston area. We have 22 guest rooms and a beautiful restaurant where we serve lunch Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We serve high tea, a beautiful high tea on Saturday afternoons. And we also do a beautiful champagne brunch. And we also serve dinner Wednesday through Saturday nights. Throughout the fall and throughout the year, we do all sorts of special events. Our next special, we're doing our Farm and Vine events. We have one dinner this Thursday that I do believe we have some seats left to. That Farm and Vine dinner is a tribute to Hispanic Heritage Month. We're having another dinner in October. I believe it is October 18th. We're so excited that our partners from Schramsberg, it's the sparkling wine that's served in the White House, they're coming, and Chef has designed a special dinner for that. And then for those of you, we really, I am very lucky to have a management team. I'm from Puerto Rico. My sales director is from Puerto Rico. My general manager is from Mexico. So our Halloween tea we've now been doing a Dia de los Muertos tea to celebrate. We celebrate a little bit early, but the November 1st tradition, the Mexican tradition of, paying tribute and welcoming back the people that we have lost in our lives. But we do it for the kids to celebrate Halloween and Dia de los Muertos. So we're already taking reservations for that. And we will also be doing Thanksgiving dinner, our holiday teas, and we are also going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party with a very special tea in December. And we're doing that in partnership with the Boston Tea Party Museum. So we hope that you'll come and check us out. If you haven't been to visit us at the inn, we'd love to have you for dinner as overnight guests. And I do truly mean it. If you have any questions about anything that we've done today, please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out. And as we say in Puerto Rico, when we're sitting down to a meal together with family and friends, buen provecho.
Thank you so much, Trisha, for a wonderful program. We have lots of compliments. Someone says, as always, many thanks for this lesson. You always make cooking accessible and interesting. Thank you, Trisha, for a fabulous program. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Buenas noches.